My name is Michael Zank. I'm a professor of religion, Jewish studies, and medieval studies at Boston University, where I also serve as the director of the Elie Wiesel Center for Jewish Studies. We dedicate this reading series to the memory of Elie Wiesel, who taught at BU for nearly 40 years and who passed away on July 2nd, 2016. We take from Professor Wiesel the mandate of teaching the humanities in a Jewish key, and there's no one who represents what this means better than Professor Robert Pinsky. Robert Pinsky is a poet, essayist, translator, teacher, and speaker. His first 2 terms as United States Poet Laureate were marked by such visible dynamism and such national enthusiasm in response that the Library of Congress appointed him to an unprecedented 3rd term. Throughout his career, poetry's place in the world. Known worldwide, Pinsky's work has earned him the PEN Volcker Award, the William Carlos Williams Prize, the Lenore Marshall Prize, Italy's Premio Capri, the Korean Manhei Award, and the Harold Washington Award from the city of Chicago, among other accolades. Professor Pinsky is a professor of English and director of creative writing in the graduate writing program at Boston University. In 2015, the university named him a William Fairfield Warren Distinguished Professor, the highest honor bestowed on senior faculty members who are actively involved in teaching, research, scholarship, and university civic life. His recent books are At the Founding Hospital and The Mind Has Cliffs of Fall. As United States Poet Laureate, he founded the Favorite Poem Project with the videos at www.favoritepoem.org. And with that, I want to say how excited I am to have you with us for this reading this morning or this afternoon, and invite you to read and also tell us a little about why you chose your reading from the Odessa Tales by Isaac Babel. Tell us a little about Babel and why you chose him for today.
Thank you so much, Michael. It is a great honor for me to be here in a series that is named for Elie Wiesel. When I think of Babel, I always think of James Joyce's character Stephen Dedalus, and who's asked to define history. And Stephen Dedalus's definition of history seems to me to apply completely to Isaac Babel. What do you mean by history? And Stephen Dedalus says, history is the nightmare from which I am trying to awake. And for Isaac Babel, the nightmare of European history in general, of Russian history in general, and the history of Jews in Russia and Eastern Europe in particular, that was the nightmare that Babel, in his thinking and his writing and in how he lived his life, was trying to awake. Perhaps alien to us, Babel's choice after his art as, I think, an unsurpassed fiction writer, he believed sincerely and entirely in the Russian Revolution. He was a devoted adherent of the revolution, which killed him by the time he was 45. He was basically starved to death by the revolution. And the stories I'm going to read are not Odessa stories, but stories of the Red Army. Like his character, Babel rode as a writer and journalist with the Cossacks who were fighting on the red side against the whites, meaning that it was the equivalent of, I don't know what to say. I won't say a black person riding with Confederate or former, there's a paradox in it. And the 2 stories I'm going to read to you represent that nightmare and that paradox. and the attempt to awaken from the nightmare. The first story, they're both quite short. The first story is called Gidali. On Sabbath eves, I am oppressed by the dense melancholy of memories. In bygone days on these occasions, my grandfather would stroke the volumes of Ibn Ezra with his yellow beard. His old woman in her lace cap would trace fortunes with her knotty fingers over the Sabbath candles and sobbed softly to herself. On those evenings, my child's heart was rocked like a little ship upon enchanted waves. Oh, the rotted Talmuds of my childhood. Oh, the dense melancholy of memories. I roamed through Zhytomyr in search of a shy star. By the ancient synagogue, by its yellow and indifferent walls, old Jews with prophets' beards and passionate rags on their sunken chests sell chalks and wicks and bluing. Here before me is the market and the death of the market. Gone is the fat soul of plenty. Dumb padlocks hang upon the booths, and the granite paving is as clean as a skull. My shy star blinks and fades from sight. Success came to me later on. Success came just before sunset. Gidali's little shop was hidden away in a row of others, all hermetically closed. Where was your kindly shade that evening, Charles Dickens? In that little old curiosity shop, you would have seen gilt slippers, ship's cables, an ancient compass, a stuffed eagle, a Winchester with the date 1810 engraved upon it, a broken saucepan. Old Gidali, the little proprietor in smoked glasses and a green frock coat to the ground, meandered around his treasures in the rosy void of evening. He rubbed his little white hands, plucked at his little gray beard, listened head bent to the mysterious voices wafting down to him. The shop was like the box of an important and knowledge-loving little boy who will grow up to be a professor of botany. There were buttons, a dead butterfly, and its small owner went by the name of Gidali. All had abandoned the market, but Gidali had remained. He wound in and out of a labyrinth of globes, skulls, and dead flowers, waving a bright feather duster of cock's plumes and blowing dust from dead flowers. And so we sat upon little beer barrels, Gidali twisting and untwisting his narrow beard. Warm air flowed past. Blood, delicate-hued, poured down from an overturned bottle up in the sky. A vague odor of corruption enfolded me. This is a portrait of a town in the middle of a civil war. The revolution. The revolution. We will say yes to it. But are we to say no to the Shabbos? Began Gidali, winding about me the straps of his smoke-hidden eyes. Yes, I cry to the revolution, said Gidali. Yes, I cry to it. But it hides its face from Gidali and sends out in front naught but shooting. I answered the old man. The sunlight doesn't enter eyes that are closed, but we will cut open those closed eyes. A Pole closed my eyes, whispered the old man in a voice barely audible. The Poles are bad-tempered dogs. They take the Jew and pluck out his beard, the curs, and now they are being beaten, the bad-tempered dogs. That is splendid. That is the revolution. And then those who have beaten the Poles say to me, hand your phonograph over to the state, Gidali. I am fond of music, Pani, I say to the revolution. You don't know what you are fond of, Gidali. I'll shoot you and then you'll know. I cannot do without shooting because I am the revolution. She cannot do without shooting, Gidali, I told the old man, because she is the revolution. Oh, but the Poles, kind sir, shot because they were the counter-revolution. You shoot because you are the revolution, but surely the revolution means joy, and joy does not like orphans in the house. Good men do good deeds. The revolution is the good deed of good men. But good men do not kill. So it is bad people that are making the revolution, but the Poles are bad people too. Then how is Gadali to tell which is revolution and which is counter-revolution? I used to study the Talmud. I love Rashi's commentaries and the books of Maimonides. And there are other outstanding folk in Zhytomyr. And here we are, all us learned people, falling on our faces and crying out in a loud voice, woe to us! Where is the joy-giving revolution? The old man fell silent, and we saw the first star pierce through the Milky Way. The Sabbath has begun, Gadali said solemnly. Jews should be going to the synagogue. Pan comrade, he said, rising, his top hat like a little black tower swaying on his head, bring a few good people to Zhytomyr. Oh, there's a scarcity of good people in our town. What a scarcity. Bring them along, and we will hand over all of our phonographs to them. We are not ignoramuses. The International, we know what the International is. And I want an international of good people. I would like every soul to be listed and given first category rations. There, soul, please eat and enjoy life's pleasures. Pen comrade, you don't know what the International is eaten with. It is eaten with gunpowder, I answered the old man, and spiced with the best quality blood. And then, from out of the blue gloom, the young Sabbath came to take her seat of honor. Gadali, I said, today is Friday. It's already evening. Where are Jewish biscuits to be got and a Jewish glass of tea and a little of that pensioned off God in a glass of tea? Not to be had, Gadali replied, hanging the padlock on his little booth. Not to be had. Next door is a tavern, and there were good people who served in it, but nobody eats there now. People weep there. He buttoned his green frock coat on 3 bone buttons, flicked himself with the cock's feathers, sprinkled a little water on his soft palms, and departed, a tiny, lonely visionary in a black top hat, carrying a big prayer book under his arm. The Sabbath is coming. Gadali, the founder of an impossible international, has gone to the synagogue to pray. So there you have the autobiographical narrator being quite brutal, saying the revolution, it lives on gunpowder and high quality blood. And you have all the conflicts there when the old shopkeeper, Gadali, addresses him as Pan comrade. You know, Pan being the old hierarchical Eastern European feudal terminology, and comrade being the revolutions, and implicit is a conflict. How are they different? Now I'll read the slightly longer story, My First Goose, in which the brutality that the narrator and Babel himself recognizes as brutality, but is willing to endure and engage in if it's the price of a better world. He knows it's a nightmare, and he believes that the revolution is the only way to awaken from the nightmare. So he allows himself to be part of the nightmare. My First Goose. Savitsky, commander of the 6th Division, rose when he saw me, and I wondered at the beauty of his giant's body. He rose, the purple of his riding breeches and the crimson of his little tilted cap and the decoration stuck on his chest, cleaving the hut as a standard cleaves the sky. A smell of scent and the sickly sweet freshness of soap emanated from him. His long legs were like girls sheathed to the neck in shining riding boots. He smiled at me, struck his riding whip on the table, and drew toward him an order the chief of staff had just finished dictating. It was an order for Ivan Chesnakov to advance in Shuganov Dobrovodka with the regiment entrusted to him to make contact with the enemy and destroy the same. For which destruction? The commander began to write, smearing the whole sheet. I make this same Chesnakov entirely response to, up to and including the supreme penalty, and will, if necessary, strike him down on the spot, which you, Chesnakov, who have been working with me at the front for some months now, cannot doubt. End quote. The commander signed the order with a flourish, tossed it to his orderlies, and turned upon me gray eyes that danced with merriment. Put it down in the order of the day, said the commander. Put this man down for every satisfaction save for the front one. Can you read and write? Yes, I can read and write, I replied, envying the flower and iron of his youthfulness. I graduated in law from St. Petersburg University. Oh, are you one of those grinds? He laughed. Specks on your nose, too. What a nasty little object. They've sent you along without making any inquiries, and this is a hot place for specks on the nose. Think you'll get on with us? I'll get on all right, I answered, and went off to the village with the quartermaster to find a billet for the night. The quartermaster carried my trunk on his shoulder. Before us stretched the village street. The dying sun, round and yellow as a pumpkin, was giving up its rosy ghost to the skies. We went to a hut painted over with garlands. The quartermaster stopped and said suddenly, with a guilty smile, nuisance with specks. Can't do anything to stop it either. Not a life for the brainy type here. But if you go and mess up a lady, and a good lady too, then you'll have the boys patting you on the back. He hesitated, my little trunk on his shoulder. Then he came quite close to me to dart away again despairingly and run to the nearest yard. Cossacks were sitting there, shaving one another. Here, you soldiers, said the quartermaster, setting my little trunk on the ground. Comrade Savitsky's orders are you're to take this chap in your billets, so no nonsense about it, 'cause the chap's been through quite a lot in the learning line. The quartermaster, purple in the face, left us without looking back. I raised my hand to my cap and saluted the Cossacks. A lad with long, straight, flaxen hair, and the handsome face of the Ryazan Cossacks went over to my little trunk, and he tossed it out at the gate. Then he turned his back on me and with remarkable skill emitted a series of shameful noises. An older Cossack shouted to him, "To your guns, number 00," and burst out laughing, "Running fire!" His guileless art exhausted, the lad made off. Then, crawling over the ground, I began to gather together the manuscripts and tattered garments that had fallen from my trunk. I gathered them up and carried them to the end of the yard. Near the hut, on a brick stove, stood a cauldron where pork was cooking. The steam rose from it like the far-off smoke of home in the village. It mingled hunger with desperate loneliness in my head. Then I covered my little broken trunk with hay, turning it into a pillow, and lay down on the ground to read in Pravda Lenin's speech at the Second Congress of the Comintern. The sun fell on me from behind the toothed hillocks. The Cossacks trod on my feet. The lad made fun of me untiringly. The beloved lines came toward me along a thorny path and could not reach me. Then I put aside the paper and went out to the landlady, who was spinning on the porch. "Landlady," I said. I've got to eat. The old woman raised to me the diffused whites of her purblind eyes and lowered them again. Comrade, she said after a pause, what was all this going on? I want to go and hang myself. Christ, I muttered, and pushed the old woman in the chest with my fist. You don't suppose I'm going into any explanations with you, do you? And turning around, I saw somebody's sword lying within reach. A severe-looking goose was waddling about the yard, inoffensively preening its feathers. I overtook it and pressed it to the ground. Its head cracked beneath my boot, cracked and emptied itself. The white neck lay stretched out in the dung. The wings twitched. Christ, I said, digging into the goose with my sword. Go and cook it for me, landlady. Her blind eyes and glasses glistening, the old woman picked up the slaughtered bird, wrapped it in her apron, and started to carry it toward the kitchen. Comrade, she said to me after a while, I want to go and hang myself. And she closed the door behind her. The Cossacks in the yard were already sitting around their cauldron. They sat motionless, stiff as heathen priests at a sacrifice, and had not looked at the goose. The lad's all right, one of them said, winking and scooping up the cabbage soup with his spoon. The Cossacks commenced their supper with all the elegance and restraint of peasants who respect one another. And I wiped the sword with sand and went out at the gate and came in again, depressed. Already the moon hung above the yard like a cheap earring. Hey, you, suddenly said Surovkov, an older Cossack. Sit down and feed with us till your goose is done. He produced a spare spoon from his boot and handed it to me. We supped up the cabbage soup that they had made and ate the pork. What's in the newspaper? Asked the flaxen-haired lad, making room for me. Lenin writes in the paper, I said, pulling out Pravda. Lenin writes that there's a shortage of everything. And loudly, like a triumphant man hard of hearing, I read Lenin's speech out aloud to the Cossacks. Evening wrapped about me the quickening moisture of its twilight sheets. Evening laid a mother's hand upon my burning forehead. I read on and rejoiced, spying out exultingly the secret curve of Lenin's straight line. Truth tickles everybody's nostrils, said Surovkov when I had come to the end. The question is, how's it to be pulled from the heap? But he goes and strikes at it straight off, like a hen pecking at a grain. This remark about Lenin was made by Surovkov, platoon commander of the staff squadron, after which we lay down to sleep in the hayloft. We slept, all six of us, beneath a wooden roof that let in the stars, warming one another, our legs intermingled. I dreamed, and in my dreams I saw women, but my heart, stained with bloodshed, grated and brimmed over. So there you have the nightmare of history as seen by Isaac Babel, who is hoping through art and the Marxist-Leninist revolution to awaken from it. I promise that if people have questions, either through the chat or just speaking, I promise to answer them best I can. I'm not a scholar, and I promise to answer them respectfully.
Thank you, Robert. So you're all invited to raise your hand. We'll get you unmuted and comment, ask away. I hadn't read these stories in a while, but it's striking how much this is about Jews entering a Gentile world or existing in a Gentile world, and it's just it's so vivid.
Gedali is vivid. It's not an accident that the Cossack soldiers are eating pork.
Yes.
He's quite hungry for it. I originally thought when Michael invited me to read, I immediately decided I would like to read Babel. And I thought I was going to read from the stories of the Odessa gangsters, the Jewish gangsters who were very confident. The violence there is in a sort of comic setting, like a certain kind of Jimmy Cagney movie, American movies. And the stories are funny. And I do recommend stories like How It Was Done in Odessa, The Story of My Dovecot, all those stories. In the Basement, very funny one, where he is trying to make friends with the upper middle class boy. And at the end, he tries to drown himself in a rain barrel. And near the end of the story, his grandfather pulls him up by the hair and says something like, "Oh, grandson, I wish you would bury yourself so I have a good place to take a shit." So it's another tone, same kind of ingredient of brutality and scholarship, brutality and hope for the world in those stories. And I found myself deciding that even though it's on an afternoon, and even though we have plenty of other kinds of grief and anxiety, that these terrible stories, in the literal sense of full of terror, that they would be they'd be appropriate, and I wanted to test them in my own ears as well as yours.
Great. I was just thrown out and I came back. So we're still hoping to answer some questions.
Or observations.
Observations.
If they're not harsh. Kind remark. Questions and kind remarks.
Yes. Well,
Michael, Michael, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Gunda.
So do you see me as well?
No, I only see a screen with a name.
I see your name. Maybe you can click on your name and click where it says start video.
Now we see you. Now you're here.
Now. Yes. Hi, Gunda.
Hi, Professor Pinsky. I always wonder, why is it, what draws Jews to change, to revolution? Is it, I mean, at least for me, Torah, the giving of the Torah, and the concept of one God and monotheism is a revolution in itself. So do you think that is somehow connected, or is it the writing in the Torah? Or is there no connection at all? Am I making it up?
I'm sure other people here, including you and Michael, know more than I do about the messianic component in Judaism, in which there is in the messianic aspect or thread in Judaism that I suppose could be called revolutionary. When the Mashiach comes, the world will be transformed. But in the actual experience of that town of Zhitomir, where there used to be the tavern where they sold whatever Jewish biscuits are in this translation, Gedali's junk shop, a group of men meeting to discuss Rashi and Rambam. The day-to-day experience has no quality of renewal or revolution or really much optimism. it's a very theoretical, somewhat bloodless idea that when the Messiah comes, we no longer will live lives that consist almost entirely of grief, anxiety, and melancholy. So that the idea that monotheism or Judaism is a way of awakening from the nightmare. Every day you're confronting starvation, murder, pogroms. Every day the reality is of being placeless and hopeless. So that I'm not really qualified to be the voice of Babel, but I can hear Babel saying, for generations, for centuries, there was no revolutionary aspect except this, for some people, this highly theoretical one. Mm-hmm. Here is an actual revolution. Though Ghidali says, yeah, we'd give it all our phonographs if it only didn't seem so similar to what we've experienced all our lives.
Thank you, Robert Pinsky. Thank you, Gunda. By the way, for all of you out there, Gunda will be reading next Wednesday.